When I was growing up, my misspent youth was spent Saturday mornings, Hackney, 11 o'clock, dog racing. Now obviously we just used to look at the wall and pick one, but never used to win. It was always bent. The dog had been given a bucket of water before they started. They greased up the traps, all these things. And I think it was a common belief amongst the uninitiated that dog racing was always a bit hooky. I'm assuming you disagree with that.
Nowadays, yeah, some of the stories that I've heard from back in the day were nothing short of incredible, really. I even got told, I don't know whether to believe it or not, but there was a guy who was a trainer many years ago. He told me that there was a way of keeping hold of a dog while it was leaving the boxes. Now, whether that be the person behind the boxes, the starter, and he said, and you could just let go of the dog whenever you wanted to. Now, he didn't quite divulge how they would keep hold of the dog, but I think today is completely different. The guys at the GBGB, we go to their offices, we have press briefings, and you've only got to look in the calendar, and when there is a local inquiry, time finding, they're all over it. That is a big stumbling block for greyhound racing, is that they think that it's all, dodgy old characters in flat caps, stopping and starting dogs, and that's just not the case. You look at the big competitions throughout the Derby or Cat 1s, all finalists are tested, and if we could somehow move away from that and portray, how clean the sport is, because it is a clean sport, and those that do the bad apples amongst them are very quickly outed. I think ground racing would probably be in a better place, and more people would be interested. Turnover would be better. I think more people would own dogs, and but how do we do that? I mean, that's a massive question, and as you say, some of it is ingrained in people already, from the old wives' tales and etc. But for me, from what I've seen, through work, through going to tracks, through going to kennels, I know that the dogs are looked after like family members for some trainers, and the thought of messing about with dogs or whatever would just not even occur to some trainers out there. So yeah, not for me. I think the sport has been cleaned up massively in recent years.
And do you ever listen to somebody whispering in your ear at a track that this one has been nailed to the floor or whatever and it's off? Do you ever sort of let things like that affect your deliberations on a race?
If I had a pound Simon for every time someone had told me, no, this dog's going to win, I wouldn't need to work for the Racing Post or do anything really. I'd be on an island in the Bahamas, because there are whispers here, there, and every time you go to a track, there are whispers. But I kind of, as a punter, all you can hope for is that every dog is sound and runs its best. Obviously, some dogs are going to have their off days. That it's been well documented. There's been top class dogs down the years that when it rains turn it in, and there's things like that it's almost impossible to know. But yeah, I mean, for me, the game's straight, and you just hope that every dog's running to this full ability, because that is key to the integrity of the sport as a betting product, and you go from there really. And not really for me. Whispers I'd sort of brush off a little bit. I wouldn't let them cloud my own judgment. I'd always back your own view.
Greyhound racing, anyone that's been will know that there's a real buzz, there's a real excitement, the colour, the atmosphere, but seems to have been in a bit of a decline attendance-wise. A big decline, the same as horse racing a bit. What do you think could be done to try and stem that and put the curve back upwards again?
We've lost recently. A big track to lose was Wimbledon. A place that was the home of the Derby. We also had the Racing Post Juvenile run there, the Oaks. It was the St Ledger. It was the place. It was in the capital. We've lost that, and it was a place that was, for me, poorly managed. I think it became apparent that property in London was worth astronomical amounts, and Wimbledon was a busy place. Don't get me wrong; you go there on a Saturday night and it was banged out still, even though there was very little marketing. The place was an eyesore, but property and land is worth astronomical amounts now, and the good old days in greyhound racing of sort of your 20,000-30,000 people through the gate, I think are gone, and people kind of cling on to them. That's not to say Derby final night at Toaster, can't get somewhere near there, but there are more things to do now. A lot of people will stay at home, watch a box set or whatever you're in. I think grabbing young people as a sport, greyhound racing is miles and miles behind, and there's no marketing from the governing body, the GBGB. I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. But the good old days, sadly, are gone. But I do think you'll always have a core support of people where the sport is almost passed on down through generations, and those people take their friends and their family, and that greyhound racing as a sport is a sport that looks after itself. People that go racing will always look to encourage others to go racing, but it is on the decline, and sadly I do think we'll see plenty more tracks closed. Milden Hall was another one that went recently, and I do fear for one or two others as the racing seems to be increasing despite the number of dogs in training declining. So as a numbers game, it doesn't quite add up.
Have you got involved as an owner?
Yes. Lessons have been learned along the way there. I remember I set up a syndicate when I was sort of 18, 19. 10 of my friends, we decided it'd be a good idea. And we was given the runaround by a trainer. I won't mention the trainer because there's still a trainer now. And sort of 3-4 grand, and sort of 12 years ago, that was a decent enough amount of money to be buying a dog. And we went down to the kennel, and Dad come with us because he was a better trained eye than me. I was still wet behind the ears at 18. Didn't really know what I was looking at, but this dog come out of the kennel and it was on 3 legs. He's taken a knock in transit coming over from Ireland, and Dad could see what was going on from the car, and he sort of just come over and said, like, let's go. So there was sort of like 10 of us, and you kind of, I could have done the deal on the phone and lost that money without knowing, but ownership now is a tough sell to anyone out there, because there are some tracks that are racing unsociable hours, office hours as it were, so you might be able to go and walk your dog on a Sunday morning, but are you going to be able to see it race live? Opportunities for that will be very limited, and it's a betting product, greyhound racing, but the ownership side of it is a spectator sport, and if you can't watch your dog run live, why are you going to own dogs? It doesn't quite make sense, so that's something that needs looking at for me.
Is it an affordable thing? Obviously horse racing is out of most people's reach as far as ownership goes, but how does that compare to dog racing?
Yes, syndication is where I would go for anyone sort of interested in owning dogs. On average, you'd say a kennel bill would be sort of $250 to $350 a month. Obviously, you've got to buy the dog, but the more of you in the syndicate, the cheaper it becomes. Steve Fluin was a real innovator, really, in syndication. He set up the Champagne Club a good few years ago. He has brought, I think we're talking over 1,000 people into ownership altogether, all through different dogs. I think they would sell a dog sort of in about 100 shares, and if you were interested in being involved in a dog of a decent standard, that would be somewhere to start off, something like that. The Champagne Club, I've got a lot of time for Steve. I think he's done a hell of a lot for the sport itself, but to go alone with things the way they are, prize money, we are beginning to see an increase in prize money, but there are still tracks out there where your dog could win 3-4 times in a month and still see a kennel bill, which for me is crazy.
going back 10, 15 years ago, there were a lot of good young judges like yourself at dog tracks. There appear to have been more opportunities back in those days in the game. What sort of what sort of things do you recommend to young people who really want to try and make a living in some aspect of greyhound racing?
It's a tough one, Simon. I think gambling on the sport, as I mentioned, it's becoming a hard sport for those. I do know guys that do make a living from punting on the dogs, and it's becoming harder and harder every day for those guys. And I think we are beginning to see sort of more money put into the sport by bookmakers, and I do think we'll see tracks close, but the tracks that do survive, I think we'll see an upturn, an upswing in things with money in the pot, money swirling around in the pot. So I wouldn't put anyone off doing it. I mean, you'd be doing it more for the love of the game than the money. Don't expect much out of it. And I talk to guys that work at kennels, and through no fault of the trainer or those running the kennel, they're struggling to make a living. Looking after the dogs, as I say, is I see it week in, week out, where the guys are doing it more out of the love of the dogs than for the money. And anyone who looking to come into the sport needs to be fully aware of that. And it's not something I would advise jumping into. Maybe a part-time job for youngsters, definitely. But it's hard going out there at the moment. I can see things sort of taking a turn for the better, but as I say, I can see us losing tracks along the way, which will sadly see sort of other people losing their jobs. So it's sort of in one hand yes, and in one hand no.
It's interesting that you should say that you have to do it for the love of the game, because a little bird tells me that you're a qualified lawyer, which I imagine is probably a little bit more lucrative than working in greyhound racing. So you must love it a lot.
A qualified lawyer is a bit strong, Simon. I have a law degree. As I mentioned, I was working in a betting shop part-time while I was at uni, and it just so happened that I was kind of coming towards the end of my degree. I was in my final year, and I was flicking through the Racing Post at work, and a job came up. It was a graduate job, and I thought, I'll apply. What I was basically doing, I was sitting in a shop watching sport and being paid for it. I thought, well, surely that's what the Racing Post will be, which it isn't for anyone out there who thinks it is. So I thought I'll do that as a stopgap, and I'll kind of work out where I wanted to go. I wanted to go branch off sort of into sports law. I remember at uni, there was, for some reason, there was predominantly sort of females on my course rather than males. So we got to sort of the sports law module, and we had a whole lecture on the Bosman ruling. And I looked around, and I think I was the only person conscious in the room, and I thought, yeah, this is for me. But I love my job at the Racing Post, and the legal stuff just kind of got left behind. And do I regret not going into sort of the legal side of things? Probably, for the money. I think you'll do well to find a poor solicitor or barrister. But no, I'm happy with how things are going at the moment, shall we say. I don't think it's given me any added advantage having a law degree for what I do, but it's something I'm proud of anyway.